Hello and welcome to Knitting Podcast episode 6. Hi, my name's Sophie and welcome to CoopKnits Daily. Today I have a very typical knitting podcast for you, but I have so much to speak about. I have one finished object, which you might have already seen. I have 3 whips, I think, some spinning from my drop spindle, more acquisitions than I thought I would have, and lots of plans. This is the last day that I am with my big yarn stash before I head off on a 3-month trip around Europe. We're actually heading to Norway tomorrow, which is super exciting. So I've had to be pretty strict with my yarn stash and what I can bring with me in the van, and I've made some pretty firm decisions about what I'm going to make, so I'll take you through. So my one and only finished object is my Ebba pullover by Sari Nordlund, which is what I'm wearing. I've spoke about this pullover in a few podcast episodes now, so I apologise if I'm repeating myself, but this is the Ebba pullover by Sari Nordlund, and I've knitted this in Rosarios for Alvor in the colour 13, which is a deep yellow colour. The Alvor is a 50% wool and a 50% linen blend, so perfect for a summer jumper garment. And the Alvor is a sport weight yarn, which is different to what Sari Nordlund recommends in the pattern of a DK weight yarn. And because of that, I've had to make a few adjustments and changes. So I'm knitting the size 4 to get the measurements for the size 3. And my gauge is slightly off. I have 21 stitches to 10 centimetres compared to 19 stitches to 10 centimetres. So that's why I'm knitting a size up. And the other change I've made is I'm knitting this on 4.5mm needles rather than the recommended 3.5mm needles for a more open summer-like gauge. And those changes in gauge have worked out completely perfectly. I'm getting exactly the measurements for the size 3, which is what I wanted, so 20 centimetres of positive ease. And I really like that this garment is very flowy and a bit oversized. It feels very comfortable just to throw on in the summer and isn't too tight under my arms or armpits that it feels very sweaty. So I like that nice oversized feel. As I spoke about in my last knitting podcast episode, I've made a few changes to the lace detail on this garment. So Sari Nordlund grades her sizes by including a section of reverse stockinette at the sides of the jumper and on the underarm. And I didn't like this section of reverse stockinette, so I've kind of adapted it to be able to put in a lace repeat or part of a lace repeat, so you don't get that stockinette section which looks really blocky and boxy. And I talked in my last knitting podcast about how I did this under the arms on the body, but I hadn't knit either sleeve then. So since that podcast, I've knit both sleeves, and there was only supposed to be 2 of these kind of symmetrical lace details on the sleeve, and the rest of it underneath was supposed to be reverse stockinette. So I completely changed that. So I started by looking at some posts on Ravelry, and I could see that a lot of people were saying that the arms for the size that they were knitting were too small. So I decided to go with the stitch requirements for the size 5, which was one above what I was knitting. And I looked at the amount of stitches Sari Nordlund wanted you to pick up for the size 5, and I tried to find what stitch count was closest to be able to do a certain amount of full lace repeats. And so I picked up that amount. I think it was only 2 or 3 stitches bigger than what Sari Nordlund asked you to pick up, so that was fine. And for the first so many rounds I was able to just knit very comfortably doing those lace repeats. But then I realised I really did want decreases on the arms. I didn't want the arm to be completely straight, so I hope now you can't really see too much about where these decreases are. So I did 2 decreases at the end of every section of lace repeat, dependent on the rows, and I kind of just adjusted once I'd done those decreases to what I thought would make that lace section look best as where I've decreased. I'm not explaining that very well, but if I could put in a yarn over and a decrease and make that lace detail, I would do that. If I couldn't, I would just kind of do rib or stockinette or whatever looked somewhat seamless. And I think it looked more obvious before I blocked it. I think now that it's blocked and because it sits under your arm, you really can't see it. I think at a quick glance and to a non-knitter's eye, you just wouldn't be able to notice that at all. So yeah, there's no kind of strict way as to how I did the decreases. I just kind of intuitively went with what I thought looked okay, and I'm happy with how that's worked up. I do think I've done the arms slightly long. This garment did grow quite a lot with blocking. I'm not entirely sure if it's the yarn itself or the actual lace detail. I think it's probably more of the lace detail has opened up and really kind of bloomed with blocking, and that's what's caused the arm to stretch out a bit. But the end of the sleeve is hitting just at the end of my fingers, like right on my fingertips. And I think if I was to knit this again, I would do them ever so slightly shorter, but I'm not going to change that now. I do quite like that the sleeves cover my hands and it feels very cozy. I can imagine wearing this jumper kind of on the beach or on the evening of a summer's day when you kind of want to be a bit more cozy and cover your hands up a little bit. So yeah, I'm not too concerned with the length of the sleeves. They're going to stay as they are, but I am very, very happy with the length of the body. It is a fairly long garment. I've realised this year that I don't like anything cropped at all, so I like that this kind of covers as far down as my hips really, and yeah, adds to that oversized kind of comfy cozy feel. The other part of this jumper that's slightly different to Sari Nordlund's pattern is I've done a different collar. So I think the collar on hers is still 1x1 rib, but it sits very high. She means for the jumper to be kind of a winter, autumn, a thicker wool garment. So it has like a, not so much a turtleneck, but a neckline that fits quite high up. And I didn't want my jumper to be like that. I wanted it to be a summer jumper. So I've done 1x1 folded collar, and I've done a very, very short collar because I want the neckline to stay quite open and airy. And yeah, I'm happy with it. I think it looks really nice and it fits well with the rest of the jumper. So only good things to say about my Ebba pullover so far. I really liked working with this yarn, the 50% wool, 50% linen. I said previously that it felt a lot nicer on my hands to work with the woolen linen compared to just linen by itself. I find linen quite tough and it has no stretch, but the wool in this made the yarn a lot more elastic and stretchy and felt much more comfortable when I was knitting. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to be to wear. It feels slightly more rough than just a wool jumper by itself, but it isn't itchy or scratchy at all on my skin. It feels to the touch more cooling than wool by itself, but I don't know how that's really going to translate to wearing it in warmer weather, so I'll keep you updated with that. I think that's all I have to say about my Ebba pullover, so I'll move on to my works in progress. So an entirely new cast on, one that you haven't seen before, is the Montpellier Top Light by November Knits. I've knit a fair amount of this top already. It's worked top down. You cast on for the back panel, which you knit flat, and I really like that you knit the armholes at the same time, so I don't have to go in at the end and kind of pick up stitches to do the arms. So yeah, you knit the back panel flat, and then you pick up stitches for the front panel, which you knit flat, and I have joined in the round. I've worked maybe 15 centimeters in the round, so that's what I'm working on now, carrying on down in the round, doing some ribbon at the bottom, and then I'll pick up for the collar. I really like the way that this top is constructed. It's super simple, mindless, easy stockinette. It's very, very beginner friendly, and the pattern is written in such a way that I think beginners would get on with this pattern really, really well. And it's just been my kind of easy, mindless knit. I've had a couple lace pieces on the needles and things that require a bit more concentration, so I wanted just a mindless passenger seat knitting that I didn't really have to think much about, and that's why I think I've been able to work on this top so much, is because I can just pick it up whenever I need something to keep my hands occupied. So the yarn I'm using for this is Belle. Belle is a 53% cotton, 33% viscose and 14% linen blend. I really like this yarn. I like the feel of it. It's super soft. I like the colour of it. I said in my Belfast yarn tour video where I picked this yarn up that this colour isn't one that I would ever have bought online. I feel like the colour of this yarn doesn't come across very well on photos online, and in person it's really, really nice. So I'm glad I was able to see it in person. But it's a deep kind of greyish purple tone, and the different fibre contents in this yarn all take to the dye slightly differently. So there's a bit of a marl in the yarn, which I think looks really, really nice. And I think it should be really, really comfortable, drapey and airy to wear. The only negatives I have to say about this yarn, and I don't know whether it's just the balls that I've picked up or the fact that it's kind of a drops yarn and it's fairly cheap, is that there does seem to be a fair few knots in each ball of yarn. I think in one ball of yarn I had 4 knots, and in each of the other balls I've had 1 to 2 knots, which I'm not normally concerned about. I usually spit splice my yarn, but because this is a cotton viscose linen blend, I haven't been able to do that. So I've had a lot of ends to weave in, and I don't think where I've weaved in my ends looks particularly seamless. I don't know if it's just my technique or the fact that this yarn is kind of DK weight and slightly thick, but you can definitely see kind of pulling on the stockinette from where I've weaved in my ends at the back. So if you have any tips on seamlessly transitioning from kind of one ball of yarn to another, or where there's knots, or more seamlessly weaving in ends with a summer fibre, then please do let me know. I'd really appreciate that. I realised I didn't actually speak too much about gauge, but this is a DK weight gauge. I'm knitting it on 4mm needles, and the yarn is 120 metres to 50 grams. I'm knitting the size 3, so I should get about 10 centimetres positive ease, and I just can't wait to get this finished. I'm really intrigued to try it on and see how it feels, how it fits. I think it's a perfect basic staple in a summer wardrobe, and if it fits and looks the way that I imagine in my head, then I will definitely be making a fair few more of these. So next up in works in progress is my Brigitte bag by Gregoria Fibres. Last time you saw this bag, I'd knitted a few of the repeats, but I've knitted a fair few more repeats on the kind of body of the bag now, so the body seems to be working up fairly quickly. I'm really happy with the way that it's looking at the moment. I've said in previous videos that I wanted this bag to look like shells. That's what the kind of lace detail of the bag really reminded me of. And the combination of the lace detail and the yarn colour, I think it really does look like shells. So I'm very, very happy with the look of it. Interestingly, I spoke in my previous knitting podcast about how I haven't got gauge with this. I'm using a 100% cotton yarn. It's the Mondial basic cotton, and it's 50 grams to 110 meters. The 50 grams to 110 meters is what was recommended of the yarns in the pattern, but the yarn in the pattern was Drops Belle or Sandnesgarn Line, and having worked with that at the moment on my Montpellier top, I can really see why I haven't got gauge with the recommended needles. I've said before that I didn't do a gauge swatch, and my knitting is always fairly tight, so casting on just with the recommended needles is probably where I went wrong. I should have gone half a needle size up as I normally do, but because it's a bag, I don't really mind kind of how it comes out, as long as it's not the size of a bag for a little Barbie doll. But the recommended yarn, the Drops Belle or the Sandnesgarn Line, it is a bit more splitty and a bit more open, I think that's the best way to describe it, than the cotton that I'm using. This is a mercerized cotton, I think, and it's twisted and coiled really, really tightly, and it's quite a sturdy yarn. But the Drops Belle, which is similar to the Line, is a lot more open. It's not kind of twisted as tightly, it's a bit more airy, I suppose. So although the meterage matches, the actual thickness of the yarn itself is slightly different. So I think if I'd have cast on with the recommended needle size but used the recommended yarn, I'd have got much closer to the gauge, which completely makes sense. That's how the pattern designers get their gauge, using the yarn they've used for the pattern. But yeah, I thought that was just interesting, since I'm kind of using the yarn that is recommended in that pattern. But as I said, I'm not concerned with the size of this bag. Cotton stretches, so I imagine this is going to stretch quite a bit once I wear it and start to use it. So I'll just let it stretch to as much as it wants to stretch and a size that I feel happy with, and then I might put a lining or something in to stop it stretching anymore. But I can't wait to work through the rest of the lace repeats to get to the section where you make the, I think it's I-cord straps for the bag. I think that part's going to be really interesting, and now that I've memorized this lace repeat, it is getting a bit monotonous and boring, so I'm very excited to get those lace repeats out the way so I can move on to a bit more interesting section of this bag. Next work in progress I have to speak about is my Sweetshop blanket. So I've already put it in my moth protecting bags for when I leave all my yarn behind, since this is not a project that's going to be coming with me in the van, unfortunately. But I have, since the last podcast, made a bit of progress on the Sweetshop blanket. I've added, I think, 7, 8 squares, and it is slowly growing. I am very happy, I think I'm holding it the wrong way. I'm very happy with the colours of the squares that I've added. I am slightly annoyed that my blue squares all seem to be congregating together, and I think it gives it an overall slightly more blue look than I was happy with. But regardless, I think once the entire huge blanket is knitted, you won't recognise the 4 squares of bluey grey that all go really closely together. I was super motivated to work on this blanket, and I really wanted to fit in all of the different colours of yarn that I picked up on my travels. But this pattern uses 4mm needles, which is the same as what my Montpellier top uses, and my 4mm needles are on my Montpellier top, so I haven't been able to cast on any more squares onto the Sweetshop blanket because of that. A way around this would be buying some more 4mm needles, but I haven't done that, and I am not taking this project with me because it takes up so much room in the van, so I'm just going to leave it behind. It's going to be more of a winter project. I'll accumulate lots of colours that I can kind of actually organise together so that I don't end up with more of 4 different colours all kind of in the same area. And yeah, I think it will be fun to come back to and to look at all of the different colours that I've picked up and to work them into my blanket as a little memento of my travels. So there won't be any more updates on this Sweetshop blanket for a little while, unfortunately, but I'm happy I've made a little bit of progress whilst I've been back with my yarn stash. I'm very quickly going to touch on my spinning. So if you haven't watched my previous videos, I got a drop spindle fairly recently, and I've been really enjoying working on the drop spindle. I find it really satisfying to create my own yarn. It just still feels like a crazy concept to me, and I was very grateful for your comments on my previous video where I was using the drop spindle as to how to get my yarn thinner and a bit more consistent and more tightly plied together. I found that my singles looked okay and were fairly thin and spun quite tightly, but then when I applied the yarns together, they became loose and all a bit of a mess. So the suggestions were to spin my singles much tighter than you would think, and then when plying them, those singles kind of untwist slightly, but because you've twisted them so much, they won't untwist as much, so will hold kind of more tightly together. I'm definitely not explaining that very well, but that is what I've attempted to do with my pig snout wool top from John Arbon Textiles, which I spoke about in my mill tour video. So this single that I'm holding on a toilet roll because I don't have any spindles is fairly consistent. I spun this really tightly, so when it's not on this toilet roll, it does kind of coil slightly. Found that I was able to get kind of a more consistent weight of yarn by spinning it very tightly, and I'm really, really happy with how the colour of this has worked out. I think the colours are so beautiful. It's a range of super bright hot pink with some blues, yellows, really bright, vibrant colours, which I really, really like. So yeah, this is my single. And then I've plied 2 singles together on my drop spindle, and I do think it looks slightly better than my previous attempts. I don't think I have too many sections where it's just gone really loose and I've lost all of the twists. I think you can still see in this section maybe where one of my singles I've just completely lost the twist in it, but I think I am improving with practice. This is only, what's this, like my third attempt maybe using the drop spindle, and I think it's working up okay. It's fun, it's colourful, it's vibrant, no idea what I'm going to use it for, but I'm really enjoying the process. The other suggestion that I had that I think has worked quite well is to hold the yarn on my drop spindle after I've spun it for longer, because before I spun the yarn on my drop spindle, immediately removed it onto the toilet roll holder and then plied it together, and I think that's where I lost a lot of the twist. But the suggestions were to leave it sitting on the drop spindle for a little while, and then the wool kind of has memory and will stay twisted a bit better. And yeah, I think that's helped. And I think the other thing that's helped is once I applied these two together, I wrapped it around a bit of wood, kind of as you would a makeshift niddy noddy, and I think that's kind of helped stretch the yarn out a little bit, that it's not as kind of coiled where I've over plied it and over twisted it as it was before. So yeah, any more suggestions and advice, I would really appreciate that, because the advice that I've been given so far has been super helpful, so I'm very grateful, and I'm very happy and excited to keep practicing on my drop spindle and keep you updated on my progress. So I think what I'll do next is a few acquisitions, and then I'll talk about plans. My first acquisition actually kind of ties into some plans that I have. I've been seeing this book everywhere I go, and I really love the patterns in this book. I initially found the patterns when I'd bought a cone of Herdwick yarn from a charity shop, and I really wanted to make the Herdwick yarn into a little Herdwick sheep toy that had like a bit of character and was a bit fun. And I saw this pattern book then, but I didn't get it. I ended up going with a different pattern that I was gifted on Ravelry, and so I had this book in the back of my mind since then, and every yarn shop I've been to, John Arbon Mill Tour, everywhere I've been, I've just been seeing this book on display, and it's just been lingering in the back of my mind that I love the patterns in this book, and every time I've seen it I think, this is my sign to get it. And so I had to pick it up, and I'm very happy that I have. I think the title is Mouche and Friends. It says Seamless Toys to Knit and Love by Cinthia Vallet, and it's a collection of, I think, 12 different toys, each with their own wardrobe that you can knit up, and they are all so adorable and so cute. But the one that I've decided to go for is Aggie, I think is how you pronounce her name. She is the most adorable little sheep that you've ever seen, with a woolly loop stitch gilet and a fancy little dress. I haven't really had much of a sock knitting mojo recently, but I still wanted something to satisfy that kind of craving of knitting something on small DPNs, a bit more intricate, and kind of a small project to go in a small knitting bag that you can carry around somewhere. And I think this little Aggie toy is going to kind of satisfy that itch of a small project to work on. So I've packed some yarn that I plan on using to knit this up. So I'm going to use this Drops Nord that I had in my stash as sock yarn. It's 45% alpaca, 30% polyamide and 25% wool, and it's in the colour 29, which is a off-white, kind of more beigey brown leaning white colour. I really like that this yarn with the alpaca, I think, has quite a haze to it, and I think that will really suit the sheep pattern perfectly. So I'm going to pair this with some leftover CoopKnits socks, I think in the colour Obsidian, some sock yarn that I had left over. This is going to be her hooves and possibly a part of the dress that she's wearing. And the other part of the dress, I'm going to use this tiny little leftover ball of sock yarn, which is Ripple's yarn. I can't quite remember the actual name of the colour. I think it's a colourway that they can't repeat because of the dyeing process, but it's a blend of white, greens and purples, which is very, very pretty. And this is for the kind of contrast checkerboard detailing in her dress. And I think these pair really beautifully together, so I'm excited to cast that on. So I'll head back to acquisitions as I got a bit sidetracked with plans. My other acquisitions are some vintage knitting patterns that I picked up from a charity shop local to where I am at the moment. And these 3 patterns really intrigued me for all different reasons. So firstly, I really love this vest pattern. I think it has a kind of similar vibe to this lace detail of the Ebba. I know that Sari Nordlund has released an Ebba vest, or is releasing an Ebba vest shortly. And this kind of gives that same look, but I like the zigzag detail of the lace, so I was very inspired by that. The other pattern I picked up is this one. I really liked the garment that the girl is wearing. It's a really interesting cardigan construction where there's ribbed sleeves, and the cardigan slash v-neck top has a really interesting kind of crossed over, kind of like a wrap cardigan with button details and then ribs at the bottom. It's not something that I've seen in a pattern on Ravelry before, so I was very excited to find that and maybe try and recreate my own version. And then the final pattern I picked up is this vintage pattern from Emu, which is the lacy sweater. Inventive name, it is a lacy sweater, and I picked this up because I really like the particular lace detail that's kind of repeated throughout the sweater. I'm visioning this lace detail used kind of on the front panel of a summer top. Yeah, I'm not too keen on the fact that this pattern is in wool, but I can definitely see this as being a kind of summer lacy pattern, so I might try and replicate this lace into a kind of summer top or vest garment. So yeah, 3 vintage patterns that are just nice to have. It provides a bit of inspiration, and I'm always super excited to find anything knitting in a charity shop, so I feel like I have to get it. Also from a charity shop, I found these super cute little Stork scissors. I feel like you can never have enough little scissors. I have, I don't know, about 4 different cases of knitting notions that I float around all different project bags, so extra scissors always come in handy, and I don't have any Stork ones, so I was very excited to find these. I feel like Stork scissors in kind of yarn shops or haberdashery shops are generally kind of expensive for what they are, just scissors, so to be able to get these from a charity shop I was very happy about, and I think they're just super cute. So I will dive a little bit more into my plans that I'd already kind of touched on. As I said, I'm going to be away from my yarn stash for 3 months, and in this 3 months I plan on doing as much of Norway as possible, as well as a few other countries in Europe. So I know that I am probably going to be buying yarn when I'm away on holiday, but that hasn't stopped me from bringing a fair amount of yarn with me in the van. I found that last time when I was coming up with plans of what to take in the van, I hadn't quite bought enough to kind of tide me over, and I felt I was quite quickly craving a garment quantity of yarn to cast on a full garment, which is where my Ebba came from. So I was conscious this time to take a bit more yarn than I thought I might need, in hope of getting some yarn out of my stash and knitted up, but also so that I don't feel the need to buy such large amounts of yarn when I'm traveling. I am on a bit of a budget, so I'm trying to steer away from buying far too much yarn. So with that in mind, the yarn that I am bringing is firstly this sweater quantity amount of Fraya Mindful, which is a yarn that I picked up in a shop called Selfmade in Copenhagen. I think they are a larger brand, but we don't have them here, I don't think, in the UK from what I've seen. I actually initially bought these 2 different colours of yarn to use separately in separate projects, and because of the weight of yarn, it's 50 grams is 350 meters, I thought that I would use these as a kind of lace weight strand held with maybe DK or worsted weight, kind of as you would a mohair, omitting the mohair in a pattern, because sometimes I don't want that fluffiness and fullness of mohair, but I need something to bulk up that weight of yarn to meet the kind of pattern gauge. People were saying they'd love to see these yarns knitted together all kind of knitted by themselves, as the actual colours individually are so pretty. And the reason I haven't used them so far as a second strand is because I just can't find a yarn that would go well with each one of them. So this colour here I think is denim melange, and it's a really beautiful combination of like a sea green and a turquoisey blue. And then this colour, sand melange, is a beigey kind of purpley toned grey, and they're both very, very pretty. So I'm going to use these to make the Kai sweater by Second Knit. I was really inspired when I saw this pattern on my Instagram before it was released, and I really like the blocky stripes. I like that the colour of the collar kind of blends in with the first stripe, and I like that you have such large stripes throughout. I've never done a striped garment before, and I think it's always because I've never really worn too many kind of striped store-bought garments, but I think the large sections of stripes in this jumper is really nice and kind of a twist on the classic stripes, and still looks very elegant and polished. So I'm very excited to be using these. I was very happy to find that the yarn works perfectly held double. I haven't actually done a gauge swatch, but it kind of meets the requirements that Second Knit recommends on the pattern. And I'm going to use, I think, the blue as my main colour, so the colour that kind of my collar and the ribbon at the bottom will be, and this sand melange is going to be the kind of large stripes in the middle of the jumper. So very happy to see this knitted up and casted on, and I feel like I'm ready to quite quickly cast on a jumper since my Ebba is now done and I only have small garments or a bag on the needles, so I definitely need a jumper on the needles now. So my next plan, this section's actually going to be fairly long. Maybe I could have made it its own video, but I'll keep going. The plan is going to be a mixed rib cami by Florence Miller. I spoke in a fair amount of detail on my last video, the Belfast Yarn Tour video, about this yarn and the pattern, so I'll just touch on it briefly here. But this is, again, not going to try and pronounce it, but it's a 70% merino wool and 30% cotton blend yarn from Camarosa. It's in a really nice white, slightly cream but not too yellowy colour, and I think it would knit up perfectly for the mixed rib cami. I like that it's a merino wool and cotton blend because the wool is going to provide that stretch and elasticity that the pattern needs. It's a tight fitting, negative ease rib top, but the cotton is going to make it more breathable and a bit more like a summer garment. And I do enjoy wearing cotton because I'm quite a hot person. I don't think I'd like too much wool in the summertime on a hot day. So looking forward to see this being knit up, and it's going to be a fairly long-term project. I think it's on fairly small needles and it's ribbed, so it's going to be fairly labour intensive, but hopefully I'll have this casted on by the next knitting podcast. The next plan, which I don't think I'm going to cast on until probably the height of summer, is the Vest Claire or Claire Vest by Mochi Knits. I really, really like this vest pattern. I think it's very classic and you can kind of throw it on with any sort of summer outfit. So I'm excited to have it in my wardrobe, but I don't really need it in my wardrobe right now. It's not quite hot enough for me to get enough use out of it. But I'm going to knit this in the Isaiah Hor Organic in the colour linen, and this is 100% linen. I was slightly concerned about this colour. It's not a colour I chose myself, and I was very kindly gifted this by my boyfriend for Christmas a couple years ago. And the reason I haven't casted it on before is because I thought it maybe looked too much like my skin colour. I don't like wearing anything that is too much like my skin colour. I think that people are going to glance at me in the distance and think, oh my god, she's naked, and then glance back and realise that I'm actually wearing something, and I don't want that look. But putting this up next to my skin, now I've got slightly more of a tan than I've ever been able to get before. I think it is enough not like my skin colour that it's going to provide a bit of contrast, that it doesn't look like I'm walking around in the nude. So we'll see how this goes to wear. I'm not entirely convinced by it, but it's definitely the pattern that I found which I like the most and meets the kind of gauge and meterage of this yarn very, very well. And it doesn't take up too much room in the van. So yeah, this one's coming with me and will be casted on probably August time. And finally, in terms of new cast-ons, I'm going to be using this Sakami undyed 70% baby alpaca, 20% silk and 10% cashmere fingering weight yarn to knit the Ivy top by Petite Knit. This top has just been released, and she's also released an Ivy vest, I think it is, but I prefer the tee version. And I really like this tee over any other tees that I've seen because of the shoulder shaping. I'm really not entirely sure what the shoulder shaping is called. I don't know if it's contiguous or kind of like a modified raglan, but you increase at the shoulders, so you have kind of a straight seam at the shoulders here, and then you do raglan increases down, so the shoulder shaping looks very classic and would fit my shoulders quite well. I also really like the high neck and the rolled edges. It's just that perfect balance between casual enough with the rolled edges that you can kind of wear it anywhere and everywhere, but the high neck looks quite classy and dressy, and you could definitely dress this up, particularly using such a beautiful drapey soft yarn. I think it's going to look like a really polished and fancy piece that I could dress up very, very easily. So excited to cast that on. And again, this yarn, I only need 2 skeins of this yarn, doesn't take up much room, so I can easily squeeze it in without my boyfriend noticing how much room I'm taking up in the van. And finally, we're almost there. I have pulled out a couple of my summer tops that I knit up last year. So this is the Sabai top by Paula Strict, and this is the Cloud top by Petite Knit. And I really like these summer tops. I'm very happy I have these summer tops in my wardrobe, but I found I haven't really reached for them too much since I've got them out because they're both slightly short. They're not short in the fact that they're unwearable in any way, and I don't even think they're particularly cropped, but they're just slightly shorter than I enjoy wearing now. I think since last year my style and preference for clothing has changed a little bit, and I prefer things to be a bit longer now, a bit more oversized. And I think just by adding a few, maybe 5, maybe even less than that centimeters onto the bottom of each top, I would feel so much more comfortable wearing both of them, and they would also both look much better with some of the trousers that I enjoy wearing now. I can definitely get away with wearing these with high-waisted trousers, but mid-rise and low-rise trousers is a no-go with these tops. So I found out the yarns that I've used that were at the bottom of my stash left over for both of these tops, and I'll be taking these with me to kind of unpick the bottom, put them back on my needles and add an extra few centimeters onto the bottom of both of them. The yarn that I use for the Sabai top is the Fildar Fil Rustique, which is a 65% cotton, 25% viscose and 10% linen blend. And I really, really love this yarn, so happy to work with it more. And I had a whole ball left over, so maybe I didn't knit this entirely to pattern, or the length in the pattern or the yarn requirements in the pattern were overestimated. But yeah, I have plenty of yarn left, so I may as well use it. And again with my cloud top, I think I have about 50 grams of the yarn left over. This is the Casasol B3 in the colour pistachio, and it's a 100% cotton yarn, I think. It's a really, really beautiful green, yellowy green colour with flecks of yellows and much brighter greens, and I'm really happy with the feel and the look of this yarn. So again, I have a lot in my stash, I may as well use it. And I think that is all that I have to show you today. Apologies if this has been a bit of a long video, or if you like a bit of a longer video, then I'm happy to make a bit of a longer video. I really enjoyed filming this knitting podcast today. I'm always so excited to talk to you guys about what I'm knitting and have a conversation in the comments about what you guys are knitting, or any suggestions or feedback and advice that you have for me. It's my favourite place to be, in the comment section of these videos, talking to you guys, so please feel free to leave me a comment. And if you do enjoy this video, then consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It does mean a lot, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks for watching.